an absent-minded, clumsy shepherd with a shocking lack of self-worth. However, she exhibits a one-of-a-kind talent when it comes to working with animals. The best at tripping over nothing. Sumia is a character from Fire Emblem Awakening, and this is her roster description, basically her in-game bio. Thankfully, this is a decent microphone and you guys probably can't hear the snowblowers outside. Don't you know that content creation is happening in this space? How dare you? I made a video covering Awakening a couple months back, and in that I highlighted how much of a presence Sumia has in the beginning of the story, despite being a side character. And that struck me as a little bit odd because typically if someone is given a certain amount of reverence in FE games, they tend to maintain that presence throughout the story, at least to some degree. But after a certain point, Sumia is gone. We don't get a lot of information about Sumia as a character. She's kind of underdeveloped in that way. I would say her main function is to serve as comedic relief because she's extremely clumsy, and the game does not let us forget that. Probably the most unique thing about her is that she performs flower petal fortunes. She basically does the he loves me not. And this is repeatedly mentioned throughout most of her generic quotes, that she does these fortunes. And this aspect of her character is even featured in the Fire Emblem Awakening comic, which I bet most of you didn't even know existed. It was a Japan-only little booklet feature. She's pretty consistently characterized as a klutz, but with a nurturing heart. In multiple of her support string conversations, she makes cakes for the person she's talking to. And she's also a terrible baker. They reuse the joke more than once that getting the perfect cake took her a billion tries. By the time we meet her in the game, she's already a part of the Shepherds, which is Crom's ragtag group of soldiers that are both noble and commoners alike. She's a Pegasus Knight. She was trained in the Royal Guard by Phila, along with her childhood friend Cordelia. Cordelia ends up joining the Knights. Sumia chooses to join the Shepherds instead. Like I've mentioned, Sumia does get kind of special treatment when compared to the rest of the side cast. She's one of only 8 characters to have a fully 3D rendered model. Sumia and Lucina are the only 2 characters to have 2 versions of fully 3D models because they have different outfits. Sumia is featured in the game's intro cutscene. She's wearing a white dress and holding a baby Lucina as Crom's wife. At the end of chapter 2, she has a CG still showing her taming a Pegasus, emphasizing this nurturing, pure-hearted nature. Then in the second pre-rendered cutscene that she's featured in, she swoops in on her Pegasus and saves Crom from an oncoming javelin attack. This scene is also internally titled Lovebirds, just in case you weren't getting the sense that Sumia was intended to be wifey. When it's announced that Crom's sister Emerin is going to be executed in Plegia, Sumia is also present in that scene along with the other main cast, and she punches Crom square in the face to try and bring him back to reality and calm him down. So she gets a good amount of face time with the audience as well as our main character Crom. When she lands on an item event tile, she says that she's excited to show Crom whatever it is that she's found. So the game takes a lot of steps to communicate that Sumia and Crom are connected. Lucina is obviously Awakening's lead woman, and besides Robin, if you choose for her to be femme, Sumia and Lissa are the next most prominent women on the cast. Lissa is in a similar position where she's also heavily featured at the beginning and then slowly gets written out of the game as we approach the end. But I think the way that Lissa is underwritten is not as severe as Sumia's. Sumia's position as a lead is also somewhat highlighted by the concept art book for Awakening. Most of the side characters are lucky if we get an early concept draft, but Sumia has a full page spread showing that they went through a bunch of different hair options. She gets a final draft of her concept art. They do the important work of showing us what her underwear looks like, just in case the immersion was being broken for you, in case you didn't know that she was wearing boy shorts. It brought me a lot of peace to know that, and totally changes the way that I look at the game. Her and Lissa also have a custom piece of artwork that was used to sell digital copies of the game, in which Sumia is getting dressed and Lissa is brushing her hair, but they're on the battlefield or they're being attacked, as indicated by the arrows and Lissa's worried face, while Sumia is completely oblivious to the situation going on and just looking at her corset in a male gazy kind of position. No one sits like that. I made the assertion in my Awakening video that the writers intended the whole time for Sumia to be Crom's canon wife and then changed it at some point in development to expand the roster of children characters. While I still think that could be true because of Sumia's visibility and their pairing options being more limited than the rest of the pool, I think there are some decisions being made that encourage them to be together. I'm extrapolating based on the artwork that they spent more time on Sumia as a character than maybe some of the others, because narratively Crom is the only character in the game who has to get married for the plot to exist. It could be possible that the devs wanted to have a pretty clear, easy to choose option for him, either for players who are new to a system like that, players who want some of the choices to be a little bit easier, or for players who don't care about the marriage aspect of the game. Sorry, Crom actually doesn't have to get married to have a child, but in Awakening, children are only had in a God-honoring way. There's no cheating, there's no drama, there's no affairs. I want to take a little detour and dive into the history of Pegasus Knights within the franchise. They've been a staple in the franchise since the first game. The originator of the trope is Shida. I'm going to call her Shida in this video because I'm more confident in that pronunciation. She's the original vampire. She sets the precedent for how Pegasus Knights typically function in the story and the gameplay. With a couple of niche enemy exceptions, Pegasus Knights have been a gender-locked class in every single Fire Emblem game except for Fates, in which men and women can both be Pegasus Knights. This is loosely based on the myth of the unicorn, in which only pure-hearted maidens can approach the creatures. There's a purity culture associated with being able to ride a Pegasus, and it implies that you are virginal, perhaps unmarried. It frames these women as desirable, in part because they are untouched. It leans into that weird, gross association we have with virginity and newness, quote unquote, being better. Shida is a childhood friend of Marth's. She later marries him. Becoming Marth's wife, I suppose, is her lifelong dream. This is also emphasized in her wiki intro. Notably in Mark's wiki intro, Shida isn't mentioned at all. Shida's name in the Japanese script is likely derived from the Persian name Shaida, excuse my pronunciation, which means infatuated, implying that the driving force of her character is her attraction and desire for Marth. Pegasus Knights aren't always love interests in Fire Emblem games. I think of the multiple times we've seen Pegasus Knight sister trios, but they typically have a sort of nun vibe to them. When they're not included in a trio, however, there typically is something romantic going on with them. Claire is clearly into Alm, but he doesn't necessarily reciprocate that. Alincia ends up marrying Joffrey, but a large portion of the fandom is stumped as to why her and Ike don't end up together. Chloe is quite a romantic character, and she's as obsessed with Alir as everybody else on the cast is. And Sumia and Cordelia are Awakening Pegasus Knights. Both hinge on Crom. Sumia gets pushed as the canon wife option, and Cordelia's entire identity is experiencing unrequited love for Crom. Another reason why this is so relevant is because Awakening is somewhat of a soft reboot of the Fire Emblem franchise, so it's chock full of references to previous games, but it most specifically references the Marth games, so Sumia then would serve as our modern parallel to Shida, further supporting this notion that she's a love interest by design. Sumia slots pretty cleanly into this desirable role. She's signaled as pure-hearted when she tames her Pegasus in Chapter 2. Her klutzy nature infantilizes her almost. Sumia is an Islamic name meaning one who listens. If we're following the Shida rationale that a character's name says something about the character themselves, it doesn't portray Sumia as a love interest as explicitly, but it could to some degree emphasize a more docile or submissive role. In all of her endings where she doesn't become a queen alongside Crom, she leaves nobility entirely. This pastoral ending doesn't bother me so much because it does really fit her character that she walks away from fighting and takes care of Pegasi because she loves them very much. But it is a little inconsistent to me that she has trained to be a Pegasus Knight since she was young, and in my opinion, she joins the Shepherds to maintain proximity to Crom and then just ends up leaving that once the story's over, but we'll get into that more in a little bit. To further play into this notion of purity, we'll call it, the first time the player actually sees Sumia is in the game's intro cutscene, where she's wearing a white dress and she's holding a baby Lucina. Although at that point we don't know who this character is yet, we see her as a mother and a nurturer first, and then a fighter second. This scene that I'm about to describe doesn't change regardless of who Crom marries, but in Chapter 11 he proposes to whoever is going to be his wife, unless they're already married in-game before that. But then in Chapter 12, there's a time skip, and during that time skip, the actual wedding happens, and they have a baby together. Regardless of whoever the mother character ends up being, she demands that she goes with Crom across the ocean to defend against the incoming Valmy's invaders. And Crom says no, and that she should stay home and be a mom to their daughter. And I double checked every scene just to be sure, but all of the women refute the same way and say, Crom, you and Lissa had wet nurses growing up. Lucina can be raised the same way. It's odd that you would say that as a king, especially when we have the resources to do this. It was just a little odd that Crom would push this non-privileged opinion, but I guess it's consistent with his character, like, forgetting that he's a royal all the time. I think my main frustration comes from how often Awakening attempts to subvert certain expectations, but it'll just as quickly rely on stereotypes or echo certain problematic opinions. I think it's very cool that we're teased at the beginning with a sort of zero to hero story for Sumia, this klutzy person who grows. Even though she could have very easily been a damsel in distress, they flip the switch and she saves Crom in chapter 2. And we'll get into this more later. It's frustrating with Sumia in particular because she's positioned really well to have more to do in the story. The way that the queen character is treated is very frustrating in the back half of the game. She really becomes a mother and is quickly discarded. And I think that's my frustration with the character, is that she has a good setup, but we're still relying on tropes and dated expectations that hold the character back. Back to the game itself. Sumia obviously has the Pegasus Knight class string, but her two reclass options are the Cleric and Knight class trees. I think this is actually very fitting of her character. I think they could have probably switched Troubadour and Knight if they wanted to make Sumia overtly feminine in every single way possible, but from some of her support conversations, we know that she's really big into reading, and she uses reading as a form of escapism and dreams of being a hero based on these books. And she talks specifically about being a great knight and what it would feel like to wield magic. So I think it's actually very fitting that she gets one physically dominating class and then one support magic class. In her support string with Crom, she bakes him a total of 3 pies based on his preferences. She says she likes looking after him. And then in their unique chapter 11 proposal scene, if they're not already married by this time, unlike every other of Crom's proposal scenes, Flavia, Lissa, and Robin are all present at the proposal until a certain point, and they comment on how they basically ship these two together before walking away. In her support string with Robin, we learn about how much she loves books. In her support string with Frederick, it's mostly about his hypercompetence versus her incompetence, and she has a subtle fourth wall break where she says that she doesn't mind being the comedic relief, but she would prefer to not be anymore. She also tames a horse that's acting out. She is an animal lover. Her dynamic with Sully is everything to me. I'm a Sully stan, in case you haven't been able to tell from my content. Everything I've seen of Sully, like, she's a pretty well-written character, but they have like a very Sex and the City-esque dynamic with each other. Like, Sumia's kind of a Charlotte, Sully's a little bit of a Miranda, a little bit of a Samantha. They talk about horses, they talk about their love life, they have a rapport. There's a banter between them. And in their A rank, they talk about how religion is fake and how it's started wars across the continent. Honestly, very good support string. In Gaius's support string, she bakes another cake. In her conversations with Cordelia, it's a little bit similar to Frederick in that Cordelia is also a very competent, productive person. But Cordelia is kind of chastising Sumia for doing flower petal fortune telling, but Sumia is able to justify herself at the end and kind of convinces Cordelia to her side, because if she gets a positive outcome, she's more motivated to pursue it, and if she gets a negative outcome on her fortune, she works harder to prevent that outcome from happening. Henry does a Freaky Friday with Sumia in which they swap bodies so that she can cast magic through him and he can ride a Pegasus as her. Her support with her daughter Cynthia is also quite interesting because Cynthia relays what happens at the beginning of the game in a slightly dramatized way, emphasizing how Sumia's actions portray her as more violent than she actually is because of how she rescued Crom in chapter 3 and later punches him in the face. I'm skipping her supports with Lucina and Morgan because they're generic and they don't really matter. There's extra dialogue in the Summer Scramble DLC map as well. Her and Lissa have a stupid fan servicey scene about how they basically bought the wrong sized swimsuits and then they end up swapping, but Lissa also asks Sumia's bust size and comments on her body and stuff. Very much a conversation written by men. Muriel calls out Sumia for being clumsy and theorizes that Sumia does it for male attention, and then Sumia reveals that her clumsiness has been an act the whole time, and she has a very Dorothea coded moment about how she's just doing it to find a husband, and if she behaves in a certain way they'll be more inclined to come rescue rescue her, basically. But then it turns out Muriel is having heat stroke and none of this actually happened. Sumia then approaches Maribel and asks her how to be more poised and confident and whatnot, and Maribel tells her to dream smaller. Maribel and Cordelia also have a side conversation where they argue which of their best friends are better, and they have like a weird competitive edge about comparing Lissa and Sumia. Sumia and Lissa probably should have had a support string, considering how they're positioned together quite often. One question that I had while researching Sumia that I wasn't really able to find a definitive answer on is she a noble or not? It's very hard to tell. The wiki claims that she has a mom. I couldn't find anything about this. The most definitive proof I have is that Gaius refers to Sumia as noble in both their B and A rank supports. She's not present in the B rank to hear him say that, but in the A rank conversation, they're just talking and she doesn't refute that claim. So I'm leaning more towards, yes, Sumia is a noble, but it's dubious. I think there's a big missed opportunity to give Sumia some main character treatment. We first see Sumia in the white dress in the intro cutscene. I think when we get her actual character introduction in the story at the beginning of chapter 2, she shouldn't be decked out in full Pegasus Knight armor. I think she should be wearing the white dress or some other plain clothes. Maybe she joined the Shepherds in a support capacity instead of a fighter initially. It's just weird to me that she's a trained soldier and seems ready for the battlefield, but doesn't show up until chapter 3. I think the context of the Pegasus taming scene is also weird because it implies that she doesn't already have her own, despite being trained in an endorsed facility by the kingdom. Dress for the job you want, not the job you have, I guess. I think it could have been adjusted to where after meeting this Pegasus in the random field and taming it because she's innocent and whatever, then she changes into armor and takes up arms because she's actually equipped and ready to go with something that she's good at, because they can find a billion reasons to justify why she might not have a Pegasus. There could be a single line of dialogue to support why this scene has to happen. I think it could also make sense if she tames the Pegasus at the beginning of chapter 2 instead of the end, because then she could be like off screen getting the Pegasus ready and getting to know it a little bit better, etc., etc. Because then her swooping in at the beginning of chapter 3 isn't just a sudden burst of competence that we typically don't see from her. It could support her character a little bit better narratively if we're told that she had a little bit of time to get ready for that big moment that she has with Crom. Also, if we're giving her main character treatment, it would be cool if in chapter 3 when she swoops in, that's the first time we see her in full armor. And it's in a CG pre-rendered cutscene. How gorgeous. Then the rest of her presence in the beginning could go largely unedited. In my headcanon, in the framework that this game isn't necessarily a dating/marriage sim, or maybe that's not how it is for Crom, she canonically marries Crom and begins shedding her clumsiness in the second act. The Queen character basically gets written out of the game and is only involved in the story as Lucina's mother, which I find annoying. The only scenes that the Queen character gets are the proposal in chapter 11 if she's not already married, the scene where Crom gatekeeps her from fighting in chapter 12 to take care of the baby, and then the Lucina identity reveal that happens later. She doesn't serve as much more than wife/mother, despite being a queen. Like, let her participate in a strategy meeting, please. Let her be present in other scenes with Lucina and Flavia where they're planning next moves or important story things are happening. She should probably be at the meeting with Valadar. Yes, this is a Sumia video, but the same could apply to the other women as well. Also, because of the flexible nature of the marriage system, Lucina can't really care about her mom, who's still alive in this present timeline. They have a shitty support string where they talk about Lucina having bad taste in dresses, and that's it. Lucina's mom also died, the same way that Crom died in the future, and she doesn't really seem to be invested in that. Also, every canon possibility version of Lucina, except for Crom marrying the random village lady in the event that you're playing the game in a very specific way. In every instance, Lucina has a sibling, and she doesn't utter a word about them. And it seems to not really be important that this sibling is also a royal outside of a gameplay mechanics capacity. The only way it's justifiable is if Lucina believes that she's the only second gen character who came back. But the implication is that once the characters get married and the paralogue chapter opens up, wouldn't that mean the baby's already born? Like, we don't know that Lucina has a sibling? It's underdeveloped, to say the least. Like, Crom gets sniped by Robin later in the game, and his wife is nowhere to be seen because the writing has to accommodate the possibility that the queen dies because she's not an essential character to the plot and it's not a game over. But it seems logical that she would have a reaction to seeing her husband get magic shot. Sumia, Queen canon, would also justify Cordelia's whole deal, because right now nothing is really standing in Cordelia's way. It's just her kind of being wistful and sad because she feels like she can't have Crom, but there's not really an explicit reason as to why she can't pursue him like that. Now, if we layer on that it's her childhood friend, they could do a Skylar sister kind of thing, where if Sumia is openly pursuing Crom, maybe Cordelia feels a certain duty to her friend. Should I write a book? It just makes me so annoyed that this character basically gets written out because you can't make any actual writing decisions with a huge portion of the cast. While I think Sumia is the best fit narratively, in general, it's frustrating to me that the Queen basically gets written out of the story and doesn't contribute beyond being a mother. Again, not that that's bad, but it's like, okay, narratively she has the baby and then she's gone for most of the story pretty much. Like Sumia has a strong setup at the beginning because for like 3 chapters in a row, she's super visible. But then this plot thread isn't allowed to go anywhere, even though it's evocative. Also, Genealogy of the Holy War is the first game to introduce any sort of marriage mechanic, but because the plot hinges so heavily on a canon couple being together, you have player choice for many of the other couples, but the central plot couple is decided for you. But I think they could have just done that in Awakening and really capitalize on the opportunity to fully flesh out Sumia's character. She's designed to appeal to the male gaze both aesthetically and in the way that she's written, which is compounded by Awakening's pairing system. Like maybe if Robin couldn't, as the player character, self-insert romance anybody in the game to pursue this like parasocial thing, we wouldn't have received writing that's kind of dull because they don't have to leave things vague and open to accommodate the player opportunity to marry Sumia. Anyways, give us the FE4 remake we've all been clamoring for, please, Intelligent Systems. In conclusion, let Sumia rule. Let Sumia be a character. That's all I could ever ask for. Okay, I think that's it for today. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoy. I'm currently playing 3 Houses on stream. My stream schedule is in my channel About section. Please feel free to like and subscribe. Who's your favorite character from Awakening? Who do you feel like is an underwritten Fire Emblem character, Awakening or otherwise? Are there any characters that you feel similarly where you notice all of this untapped potential, but it's left on the cutting room floor for whatever reason? Let me know in the comments below. And again, thank you so much for watching.